back over to you.
Okay.
And I'm going to hide my video. I'll hang around for just a minute and verify with Laura when I leave. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Okay. Whoops. Tom, do you want to call the meeting to order? You're muted, Tom.
It helps if I unmute it. Kate, you have an acknowledgement you're going to give. Call the meeting to order and turn it over to you for
that. So I'm going to begin our meeting by reading a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Next item on the agenda is the chair's welcome, and I welcome you all to our meeting, and I welcome those who are watching us on YouTube, if any. And I'd like to welcome our new members. We have with us Albert Dion, who is the replacement for Kevin Gerard from Lakeshore, municipal rep. We have Matthew Merritt. Welcome, Matthew, who's employed with Sterling Fuels, and he is replacing Ian Wilson, whose term was finished, but Ian Wilson is standing in Paul Durka's position from the city of Windsor until they get their reappointments done. So Ian's still with us. And Nelson Santos was reappointed by Union Water System, and so he's a municipal representative. So welcome you all, and at some point, if we ever get to meet together, we can have a conversation offline to talk about our personal agendas. We had a session last week with some new members who, by Zoom, and Katie did a slide deck for that. I think you all got a copy of that slide deck since then. But I found some additional material that was done by Conservation Ontario that describes in a little more depth and so on, including a lot of the stuff that Katie put in, but some more depth to it, explaining the whole source water protection stuff from 2005 when it started, I guess it was. So I'm going to send that to you with your permission. There's another slide deck that I'll send with that talks about global warming and the kind of things that source water protection programs are supposed to consider in terms of global warming. So you'll see that in the mail, in the email. And to let you know, chairs meetings are still continuing. They're doing it with Microsoft Meeting. It's not, for some reason, the ministry has not signed up with a Zoom kind of arrangement, so it's less inclusive than this is. But we do what we can do, and we're continuing to meet 3 times a year virtually now, of course, as with most of these political kinds of meetings being held virtually for everyone's protection. I'm not particularly interested in going to Toronto right now anyway. So. Anyway, having said all that, I see we have a phone number entry. Do we know who that is, Laura or Katie?
Is this John Barnett on calling in? I see a phone number 791-3342.
Which is now muted. Is that can you unmute and tell us?
You can unmute by pressing *6 on your phone. I'm pretty sure it's John. I think he was the only one that was
no.
good.
Sorry, it's me, Cynthia. It's just my audio is not working with the computer. So
Okay, no problem. Okay, cool. I'm
Okay.
just gonna call you Cynthia phone so that we know.
okay.
Thanks, Cynthia.
All right. So is there any disclosure of conflict of interest by any members? Seeing no, I almost saw a hand from Jim Drummond, but he put it down again. Okay. So seeing none, the agenda was pre-circulated. Can I get a motion to adopt agenda? Anybody put their hand up? Go ahead. Nelson and Albert. Any addition to? Okay, all in favor? Hands up. Good, Laura?
We're good.
Moving fast. Okay. Minutes of our previous meeting on March 11th were pre-circulated. Is there a motion on those minutes? Jim? Jim and Ron Barrett? Any addition, discussion, deletion, correction? Seeing none. All in favor? That's enough. Thanks, Laura.
We're good.
That's passed. Source Protection Authority information was pre-circulated as well from their meeting held on April 16th. And the motion is that the minutes for the SPA meeting on April 16th of the SPA be received. Someone move. Tim. Tom Hunt. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
You'll have to repeat who've moved in seconds for me, please.
Tim and Tom Hunt.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And next we have someone who I didn't welcome to the meeting, Olga. Nice to see you. And we're at your spot on the agenda. If you'd like to unmute and go.
Thank you, Chair Firth. So this is my update, correct? Just make sure I'm not mistaken, right? Okay. So I know we have a pretty full agenda and some of these things might be discussed later, but really just two things I wanted to mention briefly. And you can hear me well? Yep, perfect. So one of the, I guess the biggest update really on our front is the proposed amendments to the Director Technical Rules that are currently posted on the Environmental Registry of Ontario. And again, I know Katie will be covering this in some detail later, but I just sort of wanted to let you know what we're doing right now, what our next steps look like, just more generally. So the posting is on the environmental registry for 90 days. So it closes on November 9th. Of course, we encourage everyone to take a look and digest the information and provide their comments. And again, I'm sure Katie will talk about how that will be done and whether there's a coordinated effort for the committee, et cetera. But the posting is open and everyone is welcome to comment. The ministry is then going to review all of the submissions and consider, of course, all the comments before proceeding. We are also working on developing a guidance document to support the implementation of the changes to the technical rules. So again, that hasn't been released yet, and it's something that we're developing so that it would support the implementation of those changes once they're in effect. In terms of timing, I mean, it depends on feedback, of course, because the intent is to fully consider all of the comments that we receive. But we would, if let's say there is generally support for the amendments, we would post a decision notice on the registry sometime in January or February of 2021. So basically, sometime in the new year, we're hoping to be able to proceed with making these putting them in effect, essentially. So I'll just leave it there for that. I'm happy to take questions later on, but again, there's a lot to come on that in the agenda package. Another update I wanted to give is just to provide you with a bit of an update about the progress that the ministry is making in terms of our guidance for private systems. So as you may recall, Katie may have mentioned this or Chair Perth in past meetings, but we were developing, have been for some time, guidance to ensure that communities and individuals have the tools they need to protect those sources of drinking water that are not covered under the Clean Water Act. So those are not systems that aren't municipal residential drinking water systems. So this is a guidance. It uses existing source protection information to provide information on basically a range of simple, cost-effective strategies to protect sources of drinking water and manage the risks to drinking water, basically using everything that we've learned under the Clean Water Act framework and trying to provide some tips for communities to protect their drinking water systems that aren't under the Clean Water Act framework. So just as an example, information and resources to help landowners ensure that they have properly functioning septic system, proper storage and management of on-site fuel oil tanks, pesticides, other sources of contaminants to make sure that their drinking water is safe. There's information for municipalities on how they can use their existing regulatory tools to protect those private systems. So, what can they do under the Planning Act, Municipal Act, the Septic Inspection Program? So that's a little bit of what the content of the document is. In terms of what we're doing currently or our next steps, we're consulting right now with a small representative sample of source protection authorities and municipalities. So we have 1 or 2 project managers from each of the 4 regions in the province involved in sort of a pilot to get some feedback on this guidance document. We've also reached out to some municipal associations. I don't have the full list, but I know Roma, AMO, and there are a number of others included in that. And we basically just asked them to identify some reps that could also be involved in taking a look at this guidance and seeing if it would be helpful to communities. And of course, then we're going to incorporate all of that, all of the feedback and to finalize the guidance. And in terms of timing, we hope to have the guidance available. It would be basically a sort of an interactive document that would be posted on ontario.ca. We're hoping for spring 2021. But again, it's dependent on the timing of, the type of feedback that we receive and what that means for revisions. So I'll be sure to keep Katie and Chair First in the loop as that moves forward. And aside from that, we're continuing with our regular business, supporting source protection authorities and municipalities and committees with amendments to their source protection plans. I think since approval of all plans in 2015, there have been 20, I think, amendments to assessment reports and plans. And of course, everyone is in a different stage of working through their Section 36 update. So that's the comprehensive review and update of their assessment report and plan. And some are getting ready to submit. Others have, based on the complexity of the work in their region and the number of changes they want to make, they have a longer time frame. So we're sort of in the process of supporting our stakeholders with that. So that's it for me.
Get myself unmuted here. Thanks very much, Olga. I would ask the committee if there's any questions for Olga. See no hands going up. Okay, no. All right. Thank you very much, Olga, and hang around. I think the last item on our agenda is about the item you talked about, the amendment to the technical rules. So we'll get to it eventually. I neglected in my welcoming to welcome Kevin Money to our meeting. Kevin, there's been a little change in the administration at IRCA. Kevin Money is now Katie's immediate boss, so he's taken us on as part of his duties, and so we welcome Kevin. There he is. Welcome, Kevin. Do you have any message for the committee, Kevin?
Thank you for the nice warm welcome. I appreciate that, Chair Firth. And no, I don't really have any comments right now. I think that due to some changes in administration, although I'm already familiar with source water protection, this is a good opportunity for me to expose myself to some additional learning. Thank you.
All right, and welcome. I hope we don't put you to sleep there in your office. All right. We do have some reports. I do see that there, Justine's camera's off, John Barnett's camera's off. So we may have three that will, when we vote, we will ask you three by poll to vote, so that, because I can't see you raise your hands. So
We do have Cynthia's visual, so Cynthia can still raise her hand. And Justine is, she's just on another call right now, so she will be joining us again in a bit.
So Justine and John.
And John, yeah.
All right. So there are no presentations, although all the reports have presentations. So turn it over to Katie.
Okay. Okay, so, whoops. Okay, so you should be able to see our typical title screen, correct? You can see our Peely Island thing going on there. Okay, awesome. So as I've been doing for the last little while, I'm going to take you through each of our reports using a couple of slides to help guide us in our conversation. And then I'll put up the recommendations at the end of each report, but then I will stop sharing my screen so that we can call the vote. So our first report before us starts on page 12 of your agenda. And the very first thing that we have to do is update our rules of procedure. And we need to do this so that we can actually hold this virtual meeting. So with COVID-19 pandemic, the IRCA staff began working remotely in the middle of March. It was actually St. Patrick's Day, I think, was my first day working at home. My birthday was a week later, and here we are, however many months later, still doing this. So at the time, and all of our in-person meetings were suspended, replaced with virtual meetings. Our IRCA board and the Source Protection Authority have been meeting virtually, so their rules of procedure have changed, and a few other administrative changes needed to happen in order to make that feasible. So in order for us to hold this SPC meeting virtually, we have to update our rules of procedure, and also we had to find a way to make sure that these meetings were available to the public, because it is a requirement of the Clean Water Act that our meetings be available to the public. So this is being broadcast live to a YouTube link, where we hope that some folks are watching, and we welcome folks that are watching and welcome your questions afterward if you have any. So the rules of procedure is included, an edited version is included starting on page 14 of your agenda. So we'll send that out after the meeting as well in a separate document so that you can review it, because we will be asking you to sign the acknowledgement at the end of the rules of procedure, acknowledging that you've read it and accept the rules of procedure as they are. So we'll be asking for that again. But the main things that have changed are that we are allowing the chair to call an electronic meeting at their discretion. So there is a specific section for declared state of emergency, like we were in with COVID. However, we're no longer in that declared state of emergency, but it's still not a great idea to meet in person. So this change allows Chair Firth to call an electronic meeting at his discretion, and not just for a declared state of emergency. It also goes through a description of the voting procedure, both in person and when participating electronically. So as we've gone over, it'll be by show of hands. And if you're on the phone, we'll ask you to verbalize your vote. So that's included in there. Important thing to note is that when you are participating electronically, even if it's, we've put something in there that allows you as an individual to participate remotely for any reason, maybe a family obligation, travel, inclement weather, health restrictions, whatever the case may be. And it makes it our obligation to make an electronic or teleconference format available to you. And no matter what the circumstances are that you're joining us electronically, you will be able to vote, you will be counted towards quorum, and you will be able to participate in any meetings that are closed to the public if we ever had a committee of the whole meeting. And as you noticed at the beginning of the meeting, we've added a land acknowledgement to our normal order of business. So that's about it. That's in the rules of procedure. So I'll ask that, that we review that and send us back those acknowledgements. So the recommendation for this report is that edits to the rules of procedure, code of conduct, and conflict of interest policies be accepted. And I'll ask Chair Firth to call the motion.
Thank you, Katie. Chris and Albert. Moved by Chris and second by Albert, the recommendation. Are there any, before we do vote on that, are there any questions for Katie specifically about this? And seeing none, I'll ask, who am I asking? Justine? Are you in favor?
She may still not be able to.
John, are you in favor? We got to figure out how to do that.
John can type his answer to me. He says he can chat. You can also press *6, John, on your phone so that you can speak.
Well, in that case, John, can you chat that you're in favor or not? Yes, I'm in favor. Okay. Thank you, Justine. Cynthia.
Oh, Justine is back. Justine, we're just changing the rules of procedure. If you're able to just say that you're in favor or not.
Texted she's in favor. And the rest? Are
Yep.
you in? Yes, everybody. Okay.
There. Perfect. Whew. Made it. Thanks, Justine.
No problem.
All right. So thank you very much. Moving on. The update report, and that is, thank you, is Laura.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Okay, thanks, Tom. This report is to inform the SPC on the achievements and progress made by the Risk Management Services Program for the implementation of Part 4 policies set out in the Essex Region Source Protection Plan. So let me just see here. All right, so the Essex Region Source Protection Authority was delegated by all of the municipalities in the Essex region and the municipality of Chatham-Kent to provide risk management services on their behalf. The risk management official and inspector is responsible for implementing all of the policies under Part 4 of the Clean Water Act and the Essex Region Source Protection Plan and the Thames-Sydenham Region Source Protection Plan. The most prominent threat to our sources of drinking water within the Essex Region Source Protection Area and the southernmost portion of the Thames region is the above grade handling and storage of large volumes of liquid fuel that are managed by policies under Section 58 of the Clean Water Act, which are risk management plans. Next slide, please. So the table that you see is a brief summary of the actions that were taken by the risk management official since the effective date of the Essex Region Source Protection Plan up to October 1st of 2020 to manage existing significant drinking water threat activities that were identified in the Essex Region Source Protection Area. All of these numbers shown here reflect the handling and storage of fuel threats that were addressed with the risk management plan. It also includes the remaining sites that are remaining, meaning a risk management plan is in progress, or the site is under further investigation. I will be outlining these sites further in the following slides. So there were 88 risk management plans. Oh, sorry, Katie, you jumped the gun there.
Oh.
There were 88 risk management plans since the effective date of the Essex Region Source Protection Plan, 40 risk management plans established in 2020, 7 risk management plans are in progress, 2 sites are under further investigation, and those 9 existing sites that are remaining. You can go to the next slide, please, Katie. So the table that you see here is a more detailed summary of the actions that were taken by the risk management official. There were 384 potential drinking water threats that were identified in the Essex Region Assessment Report that required threat verification site visit. As of January 2019, all of those threat verification site visits were completed by the risk management official and inspector, and as well as assistants to determine next steps on addressing these activities. So among those 384 inspections, a total of roughly 95 risk management plans would be required for the handling and storage of fuel activities. Staff have worked diligently with these properties to complete a total of 88 risk management plans. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the threats that are managed versus the threats remaining within each municipality. Here you can see the 88 risk management plans that are established and the total of 9 sites remaining within each municipality. So these numbers are among that original 384 properties that were originally identified in the assessment report. To date, no orders have been issued under Part 4 of the Clean Water Act. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are 2 properties that were identified as existing threats in the assessment report that are described as crude oil, brine, well works, and storage sites. So site-specific information was compiled with the assistance of staff from the Petroleum Operations Department at the MNRF, which is the Ministry of Natural Resources, regarding the tanks that are installed on these properties. Details including these storage tanks include tank contents, their capacities, applicable regulations, and licensee contact information, which were submitted to the risk management official on September 30th of 2020. These operations are already regulated by the Oil, Gas, Salt Resources Act and are required to follow the Oil, Gas, and Salt Resources of Ontario Provincial Operating Standards. Staff at the MNRF noted that these operations typically contain crude oil or brine, and that they are unclear whether the contents of these tanks meet the definition of fuel. Discussions regarding the chemical content of these tanks will occur between the operator and the risk management official and our next steps moving forward. And staff are confident that these sites will be addressed in a timely fashion. So these are the 2 sites that were identified in the Essex Region Source Protection Area. And here is just a quick photograph of a typical crude oil, brine well and storage site. The written report speaks to more of these operations, and the risk management official will be addressing these sites moving forward. So staff have also identified challenges with implementing Part 4 policies at several greenhouses newly converted into marijuana growing operations. So these are 7 marijuana greenhouses properties in the Essex Region Source Protection Area that have delayed the completion of risk management plans. Following the completion of those threat verification site visits that were completed to determine those original fuel capacities, staff discovered that the sale of these properties prior to engaging in the risk management plan process. The operations were abandoned for a period of time and then enclosed within barbed wire fencing shortly thereafter. These complications are also in part due to the absentee landowners that live outside of the region and in linguistic barriers to communications, which have resulted in the lack of understanding and in responses to phone calls and email communication. So as a result of this, it has taken a considerable amount of time to connect with these new owners, provide that information and clarification on the source water protection policies that apply, and also to outline the risk management plan that is required to manage the fuel storage units that remain connected on the properties. So the majority of these operations have indicated that the tanks are they're not used, and some have expressed interest in removing the tank and associated piping in the future. So the risk management official, we treat these fuel oil storage tanks as potential threats, provided that the tank that is installed on the property is still connected, even if it's not used or is empty. Under these circumstances, risk management plans are to be customized to reflect their plans for decommissioning, and notification requirements are put in place in the event the property changes their plans and do intend on servicing and refueling those tanks in the future. So among these sites, all but one of these sites now have direct contact person to complete the risk management plan, and staff continue to work with these sites for final submission. None of these are due to non-cooperation from the public, and staff are confident that these sites will be completed in a timely fashion. Okay, so for future threats, the table you see here details the actions that were taken with Section 59 restricted land use policies that serve as a screening mechanism to identify new potential significant drinking water threats through those incoming building and planning, municipal building and planning applications. To date, there have been 33 Section 59 applications received by the Risk Management Services Office for review. Of these applications, you can see that for the Essex Region Source Protection Area, that 8 risk management plans were required and established for the above grade handling and storage of liquid fuel activities, and which were flagged in applications for new greenhouse developments within event-based areas of drinking water intake systems. Next slide, please. Okay, so risk management plan compliance and monitoring. A total of 96 risk management plans have been agreed to and established for the handling and storage of fuel in the Essex Region Source Protection Area. Of these, 88 risk management plans are for existing threats identified in the assessment report, and 8 were established through future threats through Section 59 screening processes. Since transitioning to working remotely in March, the risk management official has established nearly 30 risk management plans that were previously in progress. Staff are monitoring established risk management plans through email and phone communication. On-site inspections have been suspended since the beginning of the current emergency evolving from the COVID-19 outbreak. Some properties do not use email to communicate and will require those on-site visits. To date, the risk management official has found no instances of non-compliance with those established risk management plans, and no orders have been issued. Okay, so there are additional activities that would be considered significant drinking water threats in the Essex Region Source Protection Area. One located within Lakeshore's Intake Protection Zone 1, the IPZ-1 and 2 in Windsor, and in Amherstburg's Intake Protection Zone 1. So these Part 4 policies that are set out in the Essex Region Source Protection Plan are also used to prohibit or manage these activities in these areas. Next slide, please, Katie. Awesome. So to date, no Section 59 applications have been received for these activities, and no activities were being engaged or known to exist prior to the effective date of the Source Protection Plan. So a workbook was emailed in August to staff at the town of Lakeshore, Amherstburg, and the city of Windsor for review of these policies, those significant drinking water threat activities, and the areas to which they would apply. The intent of the workbook was to determine if the activities that are either prohibited or managed under Part 4 of the Clean Water Act are currently not permissible in these areas as a result of their official plan and or their zoning bylaws. If these activities are either prohibited or managed through their official plans or zoning bylaws, the Part 4 policies and the Source Protection Plan may be considered fully implemented with no further action required. So the town of Lakeshore submitted that workbook and indicated that these activities are not prohibited in their Intake Protection Zone 1 as a result of their official plan and zoning bylaws. IRCA staff will continue to work with the town of Amherstburg and the city of Windsor on determining the outcome of this review and the permitted activities in their intake protection zones. If these activities are currently permitted in these areas, for example, IRCA staff will consult with the town of Amherstburg and the city of Windsor to determine the most effective way to ensure that any prohibited activities are not currently occurring, nor are they permitted to occur in the future, and that there is a process in place and continues to be in place to establish risk management plans for those managed activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so continued actions and next steps. So continue to work with existing properties to complete outstanding risk management plans, determine the next steps for the management of those existing crude oil brine sites. Those discussions regarding the chemical content of those tanks will occur between the licensed operator and the RMO. We'll continue to maintain and update property-specific information within the Risk Management Services database, continue to conduct those compliance and monitoring inspections with those established 88 risk management plans in the Essex region, consult with staff at the town of Amherstburg and the city of Windsor, provide guidance and input on those other Part 4 significant drinking water threats, continue to review those Section 59 applications that are submitted through the municipality and applicants for additional significant drinking water threat activities, and respond and provide input to requests from developers and consultants and other municipal staff during those pre-planning stages for sites identified in the event-based areas and intake protection zones. Thanks, Katie. That's all for me. The recommendation for SPC report, I'll hand that over to Tom.
Tom, just before you call the motion, I just want to make a couple of additional comments. I asked Laura to prepare this report in part because the deadline for the implementation of the establishment of risk management plans was October 1st of 2020, so 5 years after our plan was considered to be in effect. And as you can see from her report, she's nearly got all of them, and the ones that are not established, we know exactly why they haven't been established, and there's a process in place to do them. So we are, I just want to congratulate Laura and the risk management officials who came before her and in getting that work completed. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll add my congratulations as well. I know it's been a tough job. Kept her busy. And I do know that she is, it's possible that she'll have less time for this as the reorganization in the administration at ERCA occurs, but I'm sure that all the objectives of this position will be maintained by her and others who are trained in this area. So I only had one question for Laura myself, which was earlier on in this process, you were continuing to do windshield surveys to determine if there are other properties out there that need attention paid to. I think maybe the oil well stuff came from one of those surveys at some point. I don't think they were originally on the list. Maybe they were. But are you planning to continue to observe? Are you perhaps thinking about enlisting municipalities to help with that?
Katie, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So the windshield surveys, Laura has continued to do them as she's been out and about. We've been at ERCA, we've been using ArcGIS Collector for a couple of different things. So Tom Dufour, who's our GIS guy, developed an app or used an app so that Laura, when she's out, if she sees a fuel tank that she hasn't addressed before, that she can drop that onto this app so that she knows to follow up with it. So we do have a process in place for locating those new tanks or tanks that we may miss through the Section 59 process. So that's what we have in place to do that.
Okay, perfect. Just a question that I always ask, and I always ask it. So you're welcome.
No problem.
No
And we do have an inventory, as I know we've talked about before. So that does exist as well.
Perfect. Any other questions for Laura from the committee? Ian.
Yeah, just a quick one. On the agenda, page 44, or in the presentation, the significant drinking water threats managed within each municipality table. I guess it looks like there may have been like either a typo or something special happened in Windsor. Just an FYI.
Okay, no, that's good to know, Ian. Where specifically are you looking within that table where would be an error?
Well, I'm not actually sure if it is. If you look at under the Windsor subheading, there's 33 threats identified, and then 29 were no risk management plan, and 2 were risk management plan required.
So we're missing 2 there, Laura.
Okay. No, thanks. Nice catch, Ian. Appreciate it. I'll get that fixed up. Thank you.
Oh, and Tom, you can see too in that table where Laura's added in the threats identified after the assessment report through field verification.
Yep. Thank you for that, Ian. Anybody else have any comment or question? Okay, so the motion is to receive. A mover and a seconder, please. Albert and Ron Barrett. Any other question? John Barnett, are you in favor? John's in favor. And Cynthia?
She's got her hand up there, Tom.
Oh, okay, good. And the rest of you are all in favor. Okay, pass. Thanks, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Very complete report. Thank you. So now we're with Katie, SPC 8 for 20, update on liquid hydrocarbon pipeline policy. This arose from information we got way back in January. And the committee asked that policies be developed for this. Even though we don't have this issue, we needed to make sure that it was covered in case it came up. And so this is the work that Katie's done for that.
Thanks, Tom. So if you're following along in your agenda, we're at page 46 of your agenda is where this report is. So like Tom said, we've talked about the liquid hydrocarbon pipeline as a significant drinking water threat. So it was added to the table of drinking water threats in the updates in 2018. And when things are added to the table of drinking water threats, we're required to add them into our source protection plans and make sure that we have policies for them. So when we discussed this at the SPC meeting in January, there's a couple of options. We know that it's a significant drinking water threat in the IPZ-1s of Windsor, Lakeshore, and Amherstburg. We know there are no existing threats, so we don't have to have any policies for existing threats. We have the option not to write policies for future threats, but if we do that, we have to write a very extensive explanation for why we chose not to include those policies. So you as the SPC directed staff to develop those policies. So that's where we're at today, is that we've got those draft policies to show you. So when I prepared those policies, I consulted with other source protection areas and regions where they've already got these policies in place. There's a couple of them that have really gone really in depth with talking to the Canadian Energy Board or the Ontario Energy Board. So they've already drafted some policies. Sorry, my partner has just come home from work. And yeah, so they've already got some policies drafted for those. And we had a couple of options. We could look at specify actions, best management plans, or best management practices, and education and outreach. And the direction that most of the other source protection areas have taken is to do specify action policies. Important to note is that we are not able to direct these two agencies to have a legally binding policy. So the policies that we're proposing will be non-legally binding, but I've drafted them in a way that they're very similar to the policies for all the other source protection regions, so that it'll be easy for these agencies to implement these policies across the board. That's the intent, is that we all have sort of matching policies. And I have sent them already to the ministry for part of early engagement. So they've already had their eyes on it and made a couple of suggestions and edits. There they are, the Canadian Energy Regulator and the Ontario Energy Board. That's what I was looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you these two policies. So you should be able to see the policy there, correct? Laura, if you can nod for me. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is a new policy that we would be adding into our source protection plan for the establishment and operation of liquid hydrocarbon policies. And it would apply in our IPZ-1s. And you'll notice here that we've actually added in Stony Point IPZ-1, and we don't have any policies currently for that IPZ-1 because it has, it's completely in the water out in Lake St. Clair. However, these pipelines, the threat is above ground or above a water body or underneath a water body. So there's a potential for that threat to exist there. So that's why Stony Point is included in this policy. So the policy approach uses a specify action, and the policy text is directs, it uses softer language. Sorry, I knew everybody's come home apparently. It encourages these implementing bodies to do the following things: that they're providing the Source Protection Authority with the location of any new pipeline. They're ensuring that they've got things in place to protect against a spill. They're including the location of our intakes in any of their spills response, so that we know that they're considering source water protection. So that's basically what this policy is recommending. And then, typical for the way that we've written our policies, we include the rationale as pretty in-depth information as to why we chose to write a policy this way, and provides all that background information. So again, this will be a specify action, and it will happen. It applies in the City of Windsor, Town of Amherstburg, Town of Lakeshore. The implementing body is Ontario Energy Board and the Canada Energy Regulator, and it is non-legally binding, but we're hoping that it'll be done in a way that makes it possible for these agencies to do that. The other policy that we already had in our source protection plan is a policy that we had in place for the transportation of organic solvents, DNAPLs, fuels, pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. And I thought that this was probably a good place where we could also add in pipelines. And this policy directs IRCA to do a bunch of things. And it basically directs us to provide information to those various organizations. So it directs us to make sure that they have the delineation of our vulnerable areas, that we tell them what's considered a threat, that we consult with them, so that we call them and say, have you put in a pipeline in these areas? And this was a suggestion from the ministry. And then we have a couple of other actions there that are specific to fuel and DNAPLs. So again, the rationale includes a little bit more of that information. And that would, it applies to all municipalities because it's considering a bunch of different things, but the pipeline stuff will only be in Windsor, Lakeshore, and Amherstburg. The Conservation Authority is the implementing body. Again, it's non-legally binding, but this is something that we do anyway. We make sure that those data layers are available to anybody that needs them. And that's it for those two policies. Oops, hold on, I didn't mean to stop just yet. I meant to minimize my policies. Okay, so the recommendation on this one is that you receive the report for information discussion purposes, that you endorse the proposed liquid hydrocarbon policies, and that you direct staff to incorporate these proposed policies as part of the forthcoming amendment to the Source Protection Plan under Section 36 of the Clean Water Act. So what that last one means is that this will become part of our big comprehensive update to the Section 36 update. It'll go out for consultation with those various implementing bodies. So these are the recommendations that are before you.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Again, a lot of work, and appreciate it for sure. Any questions for Katie from any of the members? Am I? Yeah, my mic's on.
Ron has a question.
Ron, sorry.
Yeah, this is for Katie. We didn't include the Union water system part of that protection plan.
So Union water system is included in the source protection plan. That the vulnerability score for that is lower than the score required for in order to meet the circumstances for pipelines to be a significant drinking water threat.
Okay, thank you.
But just to be clear, if
I think Justine has a question.
if the situation at Union were to change because they redid their intake or something, they might eventually be susceptible to that thing.
Correct. And we do have something in the works where we're able to rescore those intakes through the first phase of the technical rules, but we're still sort of working through that process. So we could see an increase in the vulnerability score for Union that could result in this becoming a significant drinking water threat. And if that's the case, we just update those policies to include those vulnerable areas.
Who is the other?
Justine.
Justine.
Yes. So I was just wondering if we know what the impact of implementing this policy would be. Like how many pipelines would potentially be impacted? And does natural gas, none? So natural gas doesn't count as a, okay.
No, it's just liquid hydrocarbon. So it's just fuel.
Petroleum.
Yeah, petroleum.
Okay.
And there are no existing pipelines. So this would just be for any new pipelines that might come in.
Thanks.
So there's a 3-clause recommendation that Katie had up there. Mover. On once. Nelson and Matt. Any further discussion? All in favor? Cynthia?
It's okay. I can see Cynthia.
Okay. Oh, I see. I'm sorry.
And John has typed in that he's in favor.
You're in 2 places. You're special, Cynthia. Got your phone over here and your picture over here. And John.
And John has typed in that he's in favor.
Okay. The motion is everybody else? And everybody else?
Everybody else raise your hand.
Okay, that's passed. Thank you. I'm going to get that voting down sooner or later.
We'll get it. It's okay.
Okay, so next is, I think, monitoring goal.
Yes.
So you're up.
Okay. So as I've been sort of going through the source protection plan and making different updates as we go, one of the things that sort of stuck out to me is the number of monitoring policies that we have. And it makes the plan very cumbersome. So what the Clean Water Act requires that every significant drinking water threat policy be accompanied by a monitoring policy. And so right now we have 46 monitoring policies, and 2 of them relate to multiple significant drinking water threat policies. So it kind of got me thinking whether we could do more of those. And again, I have already talked to Olga about this, so she's seen this idea, and it'll go through our consultation process. So hopefully the ministry will be on board because it'll really simplify our source protection plan. So what I'm proposing is that we create 6 new monitoring policies that are specific to implementing body. And each policy will address multiple source protection policies. And the monitoring policies, those are used to tell the implementing body that they need to report to us every year on February 1st about the policies. So it's a bit of a formality, but it needs to be there. So these 5 of the new monitoring policies would allow us to remove 41 monitoring policies from the plan, and 1 monitoring policy would be required for those new implementing bodies for pipelines. So it's basically, you've got these 6 different policies. Right now, there's the number here is the current monitoring policies that are directed towards various provincial ministries. And then we have the risk management official has multiple separate monitoring policies. Municipalities have multiple separate monitoring policies, and IRCA has a couple here. So I'm just going to quickly show you what those monitoring policies look like. So they're quite simple. So we just have our monitoring policy 1, and they must conform with it, and it directs our provincial ministries by February 1st of each year to prepare a report to the Source Protection Authority on the actions taken the previous calendar year to achieve the outcomes of the following source protection policies as applicable. So then we have the different branches of the ministry listed along with the policy number that they need to report on. So it's done this way. So we see all these different provincial ministries and the policies they need to respond to. And the rationale is just stating that they have to do it anyway. It's part of the Clean Water Act, and it is required. And then The RMO has a monitoring policy in a similar way. We've broken it down into their Section 57 prohibition policies, Section 58 risk management plan, and Section 59 restricted land use. So it's just listing the policies all in one place instead of each one of these policies having their own monitoring policy to go along with it. And then similar again with the municipalities, we list the municipalities and the policies that they need to respond to. The Conservation Authority, I did 2 different monitoring policies because we have several policies directed towards us that are non-legally binding. So there's a monitoring policy for those non-legally binding policies, and then another one for our legally binding policies. And then the last monitoring policy is for those pipelines that are directed to the Ontario Energy Board and the Canada Energy Regulator. So that should allow us to condense the policies in the source protection plan and just sort of simplify reporting. So the recommendation before you is that you receive this report for information and that the proposed changes to those monitoring policies be included in our Section 36 update.
Okay, so questions for Katie? Anybody? Ian?
Could you maybe just give a quick explanation in terms of like how things are actually going to be streamlined or what's going to be reduced?
It doesn't necessarily change, doesn't change anything on anybody's end other than the fact that it makes the source protection plan a lot easier to read. And so it's not going to change how you respond to things. It just will say now the City of Windsor has 1 monitoring policy instead of 5. So it just simplifies the reading of it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? So a motion? Tim and Cynthia? All in favor? And John, are you in favor? There he is. Okay, so motion is passed. Freshening up there, Katie.
Yeah, I know, because here comes the good stuff.
Olga has a black cat friend behind her.
I know. I'm glad I'm not the only one whose cat has showed up.
Okay, so the technical rules phase 2 amendments report.
Okay, so as Olga spoke about in the beginning, the Director of Technical Rules, there are some proposed amendments that are posted to the Environmental Registry right now. So a little bit of background about what the technical rules are is that the Director of Technical Rules are the detailed steps that we as staff use to actually undertake all the technical work under the Clean Water Act. So it tells us how to actually do everything. And it's based on the best available science and consultation with different groups. And they're updated from time to time using new and current available science and input from experts. So right now we have proposed amendments posted to the Environmental Registry that are open for comment until November 9th. So they were posted for a 90-day comment. They went up in August. We as project managers and chairs have been hearing about these phase 2 technical rules for a little while. So we've had a bit of time to digest this, but seeing it all together, it's a lot of information and required a really deep dive into the technical rules for myself so that I could try to present to you what these amendments would mean for the Essex region. So I really turned my brain to mush doing that, but I hope that that you're able to see what these proposed amendments mean for the Essex region. And I didn't even consider what some of the other changes are, but what's going to happen for us locally. So we're going to go through a couple of what I think are the key potential changes. So important to note that right now these are proposed amendments open for comment. So I will use this information to formulate the comments that I make to the Ministry of Environment. I have not formulated those comments yet because I've just finished wrapping my head around what the implications are for us. So the first thing I want to talk about is delineating our IPZ-1s. So this is something that's called an enabling tool in the technical rules. So currently the IPZ-1 delineations on land are limited to 120 meter setback from the high water mark, or the limit of regulated area, whichever is greater. So the two photos there, this one is Windsor IPZ-1, and this is Amherstburg IPZ-1. So you can see this is a 120 meter setback everywhere from the edge of land. The proposed amendment allows us to expand the IPZ-1 to a maximum of a 1 kilometer radius around the drinking water intake. So you can see that part of the circle there. So we could extend it up to 1 kilometer radius to include transport pathways and other potential threats. And we would have to have scientific reasoning for doing that. That would show that those threats are real to those drinking water intakes. So we would need to evaluate as a committee and consult with our municipalities whether we think the setbacks of those IPZ-1s need to be increased. If we increased them, there would surely be additional threats identified. So there would be more work identified in terms of implementing risk management plans and that sort of thing. So again, this is an enabling tool. So it would be if we know that there's a real threat that's outside of the IPZ-1, then maybe we want to expand it into that. The next thing I want to talk about is vulnerability scoring for IPZ-2s. So currently IPZ-2 that's the area of a 2-hour time of travel for any contaminant to make its way to our drinking water intake. And it is given a single vulnerability score. So for us, the only place that this will really necessarily come into play is in Windsor IPZ-2, where it currently has a score, the whole Windsor IPZ-2 has a vulnerability score of 8.1. The proposed amendments would allow us to have multiple vulnerability scores in areas of an IPZ-2. What I don't know right now is how we define those areas. But what it allows us to do is to say, is this area way over here really a 2-hour time of travel, or is there something to do with the topography or the land use that would maybe allow us to reduce the score in that place? So that would reduce the burden that we have in the IPZ-2. Now, at first I thought there's no way we would ever even want to consider doing this. Again, it's an enabling tool. However, when we get to the table of drinking water threats, you'll see that there are a number of threat circumstances that are proposed to change that would now apply to Windsor IPZ-2. So we would want to perhaps take a look at the vulnerability scoring in Windsor IPZ-2 to determine if we need to help alleviate some of that burden, and if there's scientific evidence that we can have multiple scores for our IPZ-2. And we would have to consult with the municipality to do this and with the ministry. And at this point, anything that's considered an enabling option isn't necessarily financially supported by the province through our transfer payment agreements. The other thing I wanted to mention is IPZ. So there's this new IPZ ICAs, so the issue contributing area. This is a new term for issue contributing area, which it used to just be ICA, and now it's called IPZ ICA. So previously, if you had an issue, so an issue is for us, if, for example, is that microcystin is identified as an issue for our Lake Erie intakes. And that's because we know it to be a real problem at our drinking water intake. So that's the difference between a threat and an issue, where we know that contaminant, that problem exists at our drinking water intake. And normally you're required to delineate an issue contributing area if you've defined an issue, but we can't for that because it's an international problem, right? It's too big for the Clean Water Act. So that's always been the reason why we don't have an ICA. And it's always been restricted to already identified vulnerable areas. So we would only be able to identify an issue contributing area where we already have an IPZ. So what this new rule allows for is that it broadens the definition of the ICA. So you're not restricted to your IPZ-1 or your IPZ-2 or your IPZ-3. So my first thought was, are they now going to expect us to define an ICA for microsystem when the problem is still much too large for the Clean Water Act, because it's the Thames River, it's the Maumee River in Ohio, it's multiple different things. So I've already talked to the ministry about it. There is no expectation that we go back and we now delineate an ICA for that particular issue. It means if we identify new issues that we may be asked to do that. Impervious area. So previously, when we just had a little chat with one of our colleagues at Asable Bayfield, because Tom Dufour and I were both not here when we did this the first time around. There is a method for calculating the percent impervious area. So you had your IPZ, and it was broken out into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grids, and you calculated your percent impervious for that 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid, and that was given a particular percent impervious. They're changing that to remove that grid process. So now your whole IPZ delineation would have 1% impervious area. Now, kind of calls into question then, how do you define scale and how do you determine exactly what your percent impervious is? But that sort of remains for us to figure out. So we should be recalculating our percent impervious using the new method. And you'll see again in the table of drinking water threats why this is important, because there's a couple of threat circumstances that use percent imperviousness. And the impervious areas include roads, sidewalks, parking surfaces, aisles, and driveways, but exclude roofs. Now we're going to get into the table of drinking water threats. And there's a couple other things too in the director technical rules, but that's what I thought was sort of most interesting for us. So the table of drinking water threats is where all of the different circumstances are listed and identifies where they would be significant, moderate, and low drinking water threats. So that's where you see above ground fuel in a certain volume, below grade, partially below grade. So all of those are threat circumstances. These proposed amendments will have an impact on our IPZs with vulnerability scores higher than 8. So that would be Windsor IPZ-2 and IPZ-1. Lakeshore IPZ-1 and Amherstburg IPZ-1. So you'll see the reference back to those a bunch of times. Or in IPZs with a score higher than 9. So our Windsor IPZ-1, Lakeshore, and Amherstburg IPZ-1. Again, keeping in mind that our scores for those Lake Erie intakes might be increased at some point. In the past, any changes that have been made to the table of drinking water threats have been considered mandatory. However, that's not clearly been said to us in this time around. So we're not certain yet whether these will be mandatory or enabling changes to the table of drinking water threats. But that will be one of the comments that myself and many of the project managers will be making, that and will be in favor of saying that these should be mandatory, because you shouldn't have two different versions. If your best available science has said that these are the circumstances under which things should be considered a threat, then you should be applying that everywhere. And for our neighbors that have wellhead protection areas, they could have two wellheads next to one another using different sets of circumstances. So it would make implementation really challenging. So if these changes are mandatory, we would have to do a risk assessment for every one of these threats and determine where they are significant, moderate, low. We would need to update our assessment report with any potential existing threats, and we would need to update our policies. So this messy thing is a summary sort of what I think would happen if these changes are mandatory. So we have the different threats, the sub-threats that are considered, and then this column here says where we would need to change our policies. If it has an asterisk beside it, that means that those changes would just be editorial. These are threats that would require new policies, our current vulnerable areas and new vulnerable areas. And there's a couple where you can see it used to just be by IPZs greater than 9, and now it's greater than 8. So we have an expansion of the vulnerable areas. There's potential for identifying new potential threats, and the current policy tools that we use for those. And that's all in that long attachment that's in this in your agenda as well. So I'm going to take you through just a couple of these. You can look in depth at the attachment that I sent to you, but I just wanted to pull out a couple that I think are interesting and have the potential of the most impact for us. So they'll all be set up the same way with these tables. So hopefully this makes sense as we go through it. So application and storage of road salt. Currently, the reason that they're changing it is that the thresholds are considered too high to identify salt application as a significant drinking water threat in most places. And storage that is covered is never considered a significant drinking water threat. So they've used an improved scientific method. They've decreased the thresholds for impervious area to identify significant drinking water threats, reduce volume thresholds for storage, and distinguish between covered and uncovered storage. The impact for us is that we would need to reevaluate our threats and policies. We might need new policies. The number of threats would likely increase with additional risk management plans. Impervious areas should be recalculated to do this. We don't have a change in our vulnerable areas where it's a significant drinking water threat. And then these just indicate the policies that we already have in place. So right now we actually prohibit the storage of salt in our IPZ-1s, and you'll see why in a second. And we don't have a policy for application because we didn't meet the previous minimum threshold. So this table has our current circumstances and then the new ones. So salt application used to be only a significant drinking water threat if it was applied in areas with total impervious area of greater than 80%. And the amended rules is now impervious area greater than 8%. So the reason we didn't have policies before is that our impervious area was not greater than 80%, but it is most certainly greater than 8. And salt storage, we didn't need to be overly concerned about because it used to be a threat only for storage greater than 5,000 tons and is now considered a threat for anything greater than 20 kilograms. So this would apply in our Windsor IPZ-1, Amherstburg IPZ-1, and Lakeshore IPZ-1. So this is a pretty drastic change to this one. Storage of snow. The current approach didn't acknowledge that snow storage and disposal might be regulated under Ontario Water Resources Act, so it's creating some duplication between a prescribed instrument and a risk management plan. So it uses the definitions from the OWRA and reduces volume limits substantially. Impact for us is that we'll need to reevaluate our threats and policies. The storage of snow is now considered a significant drinking water threat for IPZs with score greater than 8. So that expands us into the IPZ2. And policies for stormwater outfalls would be required. So the current circumstance is snow stored at or above grade greater than 1 hectare, so 10,000 meters squared. And the new area is greater than 200 meters squared or 2,000 meters squared. And I've lost my notes that tell me how many hockey rinks each of these is. But anyway, that's a big change. So you have the potential for storage of snow being a significant drinking water threat at lower volumes there. And then we have this is a new circumstance, the stormwater drainage system outfall that serves a snow disposal facility or snow greater than 200 meters squared or 2,000 meters squared. So now we would have to look in our IPZs for stormwater outfalls where they're draining from a snow storage facility. So there's a potential burden there for that. And this is the only threat that actually includes stormwater drainage as part of the threat circumstances. So it's one of my questions to the ministry is why only this threat are we concerned about stormwater drainage and no other threats? Wastewater collection facilities and associated parts. So this one, again, most of these are to clarify and bring into line with existing wording in provincial pieces of legislation. So what they've done is they created a new subthreat, these wastewater collection facilities and associated parts, and it combines previously what was combined sewage, overflow, discharge, and sanitary sewers. So for us, again, we have to evaluate our threats and policies Previously, sanitary sewers were not considered a significant drinking water threat in the Essex region. So there's potential for additional threats, but these are managed with prescribed instruments. Tons of words here on this one. I've tried to sort of bold what's different. So combined sewer overflows is now combined sewer or partially separated sanitary sewer, or sanitary sewer overflow from a manhole or wet well, and the volume of treated effluent has changed as well. And we have our IPZ-8s there again. And again, down here, combined sewer or partially separated sanitary sewer or sanitary overflow, discharging to land or surface water. And then we have also these wet wells. So what it just means for our policies is an editorial change to the policies, but then the province who implements those policies would need to consider these different circumstances. So whether or not that it results in new threats, the province would be responsible for determining that. Stormwater management facilities and drainage systems. So again, bringing into line some with different ministry approaches. Threats and policies would need to be reevaluated, potential for additional threats, mostly managed with prescribed instrument policies. Now, I've already kind of given Justine a heads up on this one because I thought it was a bit odd, and I did sit on the working committee for this, and I brought it up at that time as well, but it's still here. So our first circumstance, the proposed amendment says predominant land use is rural agriculture, outdoor recreational or parkland, excluding greenhouses. And then at the bottom, you've got predominant land use is commercial or industrial land use, including greenhouses. So it's odd that they've called out greenhouses and called it a land use that it is not zoned as. So that certainly will be a comment that I include and will encourage Justine to include as well. The other thing that's a little bit odd about that is that I think we have the most greenhouses kind of anywhere, and this won't even have an impact on us because it doesn't apply in IPZs where we have a lot of greenhouses. So I don't know what their thinking was on that. But other than that, there's also a lot of changes to the impervious area. So it's now we're talking percent impervious versus actual areas. So a lot of changes again in the language that result in editorial changes to our policies, but potential for new threats to be identified by the province. So those last two would apply to Windsor IPZ-2, Windsor IPZ-1, Amherstburg IPZ-1, and Lakeshore IPZ-1. Handling and storage of Dean apples is something that I've been happy to not have to be concerned about. I've heard a lot of conversation from other project managers about Dean apples over the years, and have just been sort of happy to tune out. But under the proposed amendments, they've changed the scoring. So these would now be considered a significant drinking water threat in our IPZs with scores greater than 9. So those 3 IPZ1s. So we would have to add new policies and we would have new threats. And those are usually handled with Part 4. So these would be risk management plans. So we would be joining up with everybody else who doesn't know how to write a risk management plan for Dean apples because it's been an ongoing topic. But these amendments are also supposed to help with that. So this is we didn't have the circumstance before. So the new one is the engagement of an activity that may include, but not limited to, those provided in list 1 of section 11 of the glossary of terms in the table of drinking water threats. So they'll tell us which things are chemicals and that we need to be concerned about. And again, it'll apply in these 3 IPZ1s. There's a lot of threats that fall under the category of waste. And what they found is that the rules aren't applying very well, or they're not aligning well with the definition of waste under the Environmental Protection Act. So there's just been a lot of editorial changes to these and sort of moving some things that weren't considered under the waste threat into the waste threat. So just 2 more of these to go through, and then we'll be done with this. So waste transfer processing sites previously didn't capture municipal waste explicitly, and Olga and I chatted about this, and I think the best that we've come up with is that municipal waste is like your receiving stations, like for your municipal, like your dump and that sort of thing, right? So now we have two subcategories: hazardous and liquid industrial waste and municipal waste. So we would need to make some editorial changes to our policies. The other thing that's important to note again here is that hazardous waste is now considered a significant drinking water threat for IPZ, Windsor IPZ-2. So there's some additional significant drinking water threats possible. So this lays out those changes between the current circumstance and the new circumstance. So you can see that it just basically is pulling out, municipal waste versus hazardous waste. Last one is hauled sewage. So the language before didn't adequately distinguish that the activity was a waste activity and storage wasn't captured. So we're just sort of changing, again, our language. But it does mean an addition of these storage policies, which previously weren't considered a significant drinking water threat. So again, this just goes through the current and new circumstances. So again, the potential for identifying a bunch of new significant drinking water threats. So a quick summary of what that might mean for us is that at least 20 of our 50 existing policies would need to be edited. We would need to add policies, new policies for 7 drinking water threats. And many of the proposed amendments would affect mostly prescribed instrument policies where the province is the implementing body. So it wouldn't have a ton of burden on our risk management official, but there are policies that would use Part 4 that would need to be changed as well. Again, highlighting the changes that might happen in Windsor IPZ-2 for the storage of snow, sanitary sewers, storage of hazardous waste and stormwater outfalls from commercial industrial areas. And the City of Windsor would need to evaluate their existing specify action policies. So the attachment that's in your agenda uses basically the same format that I just showed you in the PowerPoint presentation, but it goes through every one of the table drinking water threat circumstances and how they've changed, and has a few other details in there as well. So I will be using that information as I've just sort of finished wrapping my head around even what it means. I'll be using that to help me create the comments that I have for the ministry on this. The project managers and chairs are awaiting some communication from the ministry as well on sort of helping us out with some clarifying questions. So I haven't written my comments yet because I did a really deep dive into the technical rules so that I could present this to you, and I hope some of it sunk in anyway. So the recommendations before you on this one are that you receive it for information and that you direct administration to prepare comments to the Ministry of Environment in response to the proposed amendments to the Director of Technical Rules. I will provide those to you, and I welcome you as members of the SPC to submit your own comments as individuals. And you can also, perhaps Chair Firth will also submit some comments. So those are the recommendations before you. I'm sorry, I usually try to make source water more exciting, but it was hard to make that exciting.
Is anybody excited? Are there any questions or comments for Katie? Justine, and then Nelson.
Okay, just going back to that slide, whichever one it was.
With stormwater?
Yeah, so this only applies to stormwater management facilities that discharge to groundwater, or surface water.
Yeah.
So it would be all stormwater ponds would be impacted.
Correct.
So yeah, totally agree. And we've discussed that before, that greenhouses need to be captured in the section that's defined as agriculture, not industrial commercial. If they don't like that, then they can create a 4th category that is specific to greenhouse. Although I still think that that's not, it shouldn't be separated away from agriculture, full stop.
Yeah.
So what is the impact of this then?
I don't think it's going to have a huge impact for us, because these are, again, they're only threats in our IPZs with scores greater than 8 or 9, which are not our Lake Erie intakes. So I don't really know. I told them I don't really know why they're opening that particular can of worms when they don't really need to. So
So let's just speculate that it did impact. Let's just say that this circumstance was in one of the IPZs that was captured. What would the impact be to a grower?
So these use a prescribed instrument, so it would just be that they would have to revisit their ECA to make sure that they're considering source water protection.
And what does that look like?
I'm not really sure that those are implemented by the province. So I don't know if Olga might have any insight on that at all.
I mean, I can speak more generally to the fact that the ministry would consider whether there are additional terms and conditions that would need to be added into an instrument. I'm just not entirely sure when it comes to greenhouses, what all of the different precautions or standards or terms and conditions are in an instrument already, but ensuring that whatever effluent or discharge from that operation is managed, so that it's not impacting sources of drinking water. I know that's not specific. I mean, if there was an interest from the committee in seeing specific terms and conditions, I'm sure we could reach out to our approvals branch to get some examples. But I mean, I can only just comment generally that they would be considering the potential of that discharge or effluent to impact source water.
So, I mean, those instruments that are in place now, the primary focus is nutrients and sampling for nutrients on a monthly basis. There is also some, I think if they take parking water outfalls or runoff, then they also have to sample for, I can't remember, some sort of oils or something. Is there anything else that would potentially be captured if they were considering source water? I mean, source water in this, would it be only focused on the impacts that we're looking at in this region? So we don't consider nutrients in source water here, do we?
No, you know what, I don't know exactly what the chemicals are that are identified as the threat for these. So like they would have a specific chemical that would be identified. And I didn't dive that deep.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think, like, because these policies always can worry me in terms of like a thin edge of the wedge type situation. So yes, it doesn't impact today, but would there be changes in the future that might create an impact? And if so, then we should at least be prepared for what those changes might be. But I think primarily my comment is that it needs to be captured as agriculture because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
Cynthia typed in a question, comment. So the comments are due on to the environmental registry, so to the ministry on November 9th. So if you as an individual want to submit your own comments, then you just need to do so by November 9th. If you want to provide me with some comments, I don't know. Olga, do we have any idea when George might be able to have that meeting with us?
No, I don't have an update yet. I mean, understand that we're sort of racing the clock because of the closing date of November 9th, but just aren't able to yet set up the sessions, but yeah.
No, I understand. So if you as the committee, if you want to send me anything by, let's say, October 30th, that'll still allow me time to incorporate it into any comments if you want to do that.
So when you get the comments developed and ready to send, can you also send it to the committee so that
yes,
we see exactly what you sent?
Yeah. And yes, Justine, that link is correct.
So I guess we'll probably send in comments too.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
I'm glad we've got a couple folks from the City of Windsor because I would like to follow up Tom and Ian because I do think that there's a substantial amount of impact for the City of Windsor. So it would be good for you guys to comment as well as Lakeshore and Amherstburg. You should be submitting your own comments as well on this.
Yeah, it looks like there might be a large impact to areas in the city. I kind of want to wrap my head around it a little
Yeah,
bit.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it seems like almost everything in the IPZ2 might be affected with
Yeah.
like 50% impervious. That's, could be a large part of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
so thanks to Katie for raising the flag, I guess. These kind of things go to the registry and nobody pays any attention to them sometimes. So it's good we have an investigator on the job. Any other questions? Seeing none. There was a recommendation you had up there, I think.
Recommendation was receiving for information, and also that administration prepare comments to Ministry of Environment in response to the.
And if we could add and let the report be circulated to the committee when it's developed.
Sure. Laura, did you catch that? Add that as part of the recommendations, that the comments be circulated to the Source Protection Committee when they're developed.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
Mover. Albert, seconded by Matt. We got members who raise their hands. That's great. Okay, all in favor? And John has left the meeting, so.
Yeah, John had to go.
You've got everybody. Okay. Thank you. Motion's passed.
Perfect.
I don't have the last page.
We're at other business.
Is there any other business?
I just had Wolga reminded me about something I wanted to tell the SPC about. So there was an incident at the gas station at the Arner stop at Arner and County Road 20 or 50. I never remember. Anyway, so sort of, we heard about it in the media, and it was first reported as a gas leak, and then it was a fuel spill, and there was a few different sort of things that went around. So we at IRCA got a request from the media to comment on it, and I responded that I didn't really know anything about it, so I wasn't comfortable speaking to the media without having that information, and followed up with Warren Higgins and Rodney Bouchard, who are the drinking operators at Harold Colchester and Union, respectively. And it was an interesting sort of chain of events that happened from there. So the folks at Union knew about what had happened because one of their staff is also a volunteer firefighter. And the folks at Harold Colchester found out because I told them, which has happened a couple of times in the last, year or two, that it's been me sort of telling them about something in the media. So I followed up with Spills Action, tried to get a little bit more information on it, and I've talked to Olga as well. So everything happened the way that it was supposed to with Spills Action, but there was a fair bit of kind of misreporting and misinformation that happened. So what actually happened is that there was a small leak on site that resulted in gas fumes building up in the basement of the building. So the threat was a threat of explosion, not a threat of fuel actually leaking out into the environment. So the fire department confirmed that there was no fuel leaking to the environment. It's very close to our EBA, so there was some concern about that. So Spills Action did follow everything that they were supposed to do. They looked at where the EBA was. They looked at whether there was any fuel discharged to the environment, and determined that it wasn't a threat. So they did not need to contact the water treatment operators. In this particular incident, because there was so much confusion around what had actually happened, it would have been nice if there was like an all clear sort of thing. So I've raised it with a couple of folks locally, and it hasn't really gotten any traction, but it'd be nice if we could develop some sort of better regional conversation about that, that this event happened in Kingsville, and knowing that there may be an impact in Leamington and Essex. So how do we locally make sure that information gets to the people that it needs to get to? So that's a conversation that's kind of on the back burner, but that is something that happened that sort of raises an alarm of like a potentially broken system. So good to know that Spills Action was on top of it, but then how do we also locally make sure that we're covering all of that? That was all I wanted to mention.
I'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
A couple of suggestions come to mind, but need to be vetted, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other business? Any new business? Seeing none. It's time, Tim. What? No sound. There you are.
Oh, now you're muted, Tim. So you were unmuted before.
I virtually move that the meeting adjourn.
All right. Second. No second. Nobody wants to say, oh, there we go, Ron. All right. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time. And we'll get used to this, I guess, at some point.
Yeah.
Remember to leave our mics on or turn them on. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh,
Oh,
I did want to note that I forgot to mention Larry Reek, who was with us through this whole thing. But I see his camera's gone, so I don't know if he's gone or not. Anyway, sorry, Larry. I should have mentioned you by name. There you are.
oh,
I
he's
just
muted.
I like being in the background. I wish I could have turned my camera off. And yeah, so now I have another one at 6 o'clock. So now I was just getting out to maybe get something to eat so I can get back on in 10 minutes. It was a good meeting though. Very good, informative.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Larry, and sorry about missing you. Okay, Katie, hold the switch.
Awesome. Thank you so much.